Alrighty. Hello. So, I got these 3 free samples of watercolor ground, 3 different varieties from Core, which is the watercolor branch of the Golden Company that makes other paints like acrylic paints. So they have these 3 grounds here, and on the back they explain what each is. Cold pressed ground here, which has the roughest texture, kind of the heaviest density. The watercolor ground, which is the thinnest, most watery, and is also one that I've purchased before. Bought a little jar of that. And then the last is light dimensional ground, which is thick, similar to the cold press, but it's more light, like fluffy, like plushy, like not exactly plushy like, but just in comparison, it feels less dense, a little more plush, and a little more soft. It has more of a texture than the thin and watery watercolor ground, but it's not like this rough, clear texture here that's more like a rough paper. So I already started on these 3, and by putting down a layer of color, I wanted to test all 3 out by doing kind of similar techniques on them, similar paint, just to see what the difference is, see if I like any of them, how well they handle different mediums and things. I wanted to see if any of them were any good for me. Like I said, I already tried the watercolor ground before, and for me, it didn't work out so well, or I didn't take a liking to it. I thought I could use it to help kind of cover up mistakes in my watercolor paintings, kind of use it like almost like a little whiteout and then paint on top of it. I tested it for that in various settings, but I even saw some like blogs that showed examples of it being used that way, but it doesn't seem to work very well for that. It shows through still, like kind of mixes with whatever's below, so it kind of muddies the color of the white ground for the first layers, and then if you keep layering and layering, like you can clearly tell the difference between the watercolor ground section and the paper itself. And of course, painting on top of it is really not similar to painting on actual watercolor paper at all. I know there's a pretty big artist, watercolor painter, I think her name is Ali Kavanaugh. She also works with Core. They've collaborated before. And I'm pretty sure that she said that she basically always, like, she uses Fabriano paper, but then she just covers the paper in watercolor ground. I think that's how I remember her methodology. Very unique. I've never heard anyone do it like that before. I really can't understand how she makes it work, but I mean, she's got videos on YouTube showing her process, and her paintings are clearly beautiful, so somehow she makes it work, but not for me. Still, I'm testing it out along with the other 2 to help as a basis of comparison. At the very least, you can see between the 3, the layer of color is a lot more vibrant on this compared to the other 2. So I guess it shows color a bit better. You can also see on this one, they've clearly used a brush to apply it on here. So you can very clearly see the brush lines, and that texture shows through to the painting itself as well. I'm sure you could also apply it in a more smooth fashion with like a palette knife or something to help smooth it over. But I've also tried to use it to kind of cover things like my homemade sketchbook. Tried to cover the cover with it, and it didn't work. It kind of peeled off because it's acrylic. It's an acrylic medium basically, so it kind of just peeled off like gum. But when I opened the package and I saw these 3, this one, even without any painting or anything, this one immediately, the cold pressed ground jumped out at me as, at least looks wise, the feel wise, between the 3 of them, this feels the closest by far, I think, to real paper texture and real paper appearance. in comparison to the other two. I feel like this passes much better for a watercolor ground than the actual watercolor ground. I'm not even sure why. I mean, this is like a cold press surface, but you could even call this like a rough press surface. Apparently in the instructions they say you can smooth it over with a dry palette for a rougher texture, or with a wet palette for a smoother texture. So I guess it could be closer to rough or closer to smooth depending on how you apply it. But either way, this is much this just felt and looked to me, between the three, like I was actually attracted to this surface. I thought, oh, this looks and feels luxurious and nice in comparison. The light dimensional ground, I think I do still like it better than this one. I mean, they clearly also applied this with a palette, but it also still has kind of like a plasticky, artificial, synthetic feel to me. I mean, when I tried painting on it, this first layer, you can see on the edge at the top, the sides, even on the bottom, and anywhere there's this slight crease here, and here where there's no crease at all, it's just smooth. It almost seems to, like, this surface or material seems to repel the paint. It was very strange behavior. That's not what I would expect or want from a watercolor or like a painting surface. So I don't think this is good for a watercolor. So we're gonna see, though, I already started with more detail on this one. I'm gonna try to do similar ones on the other two. I'm gonna keep doing watercolor, so I wanted to, as you can see, I wanted to try the gradients first to see how it can handle like a really wet, full coverage wash and soft gradients. And then I also wanted to see fine details. I think no matter what, all three grounds are not gonna handle, it's not gonna be able to do like super fine thin lines the way a real paper would. They're always gonna have some fatness, some thickness to it, which is a shame. I, of course, really like those thin, delicate lines that add a lot to a painting, make it more, well, delicate, feel less heavy. But in order to circumvent that, I do want to test some inks on it, like pens on it, and as well as some pencils and things like that. So we're going to try a few things, and also acrylic markers, maybe some acrylic gouache, or just regular gouache, or both. Alright, so here we have a few various flowers. I'm going to try the same on here, and like the little sun in the corner. So we're going to try those. Oh my god! I accidentally squished my really expensive, really good brush. Oh no. My Oscoda. Okay. No harm done, right? I'm gonna put my good brushes to the side for the moment. With these surfaces, I don't want to risk ruining my expensive, nice brushes, so those are gonna be to the side. Let's see here. But I still need some fine brushes to try these fine little details. Let's try this brush here. And for this, I kind of want to try using up some spare paints here that I'm going to try some little flowers here. Alright, and I'm going to have another brush to pull those details out. Let's see, this brush is probably okay for it. So right now I'm working on the light dimensional ground, which is kind of like the plushy, puffy one. And I'm expecting for all three of these that this kind of more, the less absorbent surface is going to make it so that the layers below will be super easily lifted up. So whatever painting is underneath, I don't expect it to be able to survive being no glazing allowed, or very little glazing allowed. I don't expect glazing to work super well. Oh wait, this is not the light dimensional. I'm sorry. My brain is mixed up. This one is the whatchamacallit, the watercolor ground, the thin one, the thin watery one. Let's see here. I'm not sure if it's just the regular drawing shift, but I feel like the drawing shift is more prominent on this ground compared to when it's on real paper as well. Alright, let's try some fine lines here. First we're going to try with just some paint and a brush. doesn't seem too bad. Since this is less rough than the cold press, maybe I will test it with one of my nicer brushes just for one stem. Just to really test, because a lot of my other brushes can't handle super fine lines no matter what anyways, so it's a bit of an unfair test. Alright, so it seems like it's able to handle some pretty thin lines here. Without feathering. Look at that. Alright, I'm pretty satisfied with the ability to handle thin paint lines for that one. Let me test it here as well, since I never tested it with a nice brush. This is risky with the paper, but we're gonna go for a really light touch here. And we're gonna try to drag it downward from the opposite direction. Or alright, the watercolor ground seems able to do thinner lines overall, but this can handle some pretty thin lines with the right brush. I do think that watercolor paper is just better able to handle really thin lines, like overall. I don't know why, it's just something about the absorbency, the slight feathering at the edges and bleed. Something. But it's very useful to know that they can handle some pretty fine lines. Alright, I think this should have dried enough by now that I can attempt to glaze over some of these petals. I don't think it's gonna work out very well, but we're gonna try. Alright. With the watercolor ground, it does seem to be prone to having this watery edge thing where the color, a lot of the color gathers and bleeds at the outer edge, the ring of the painting area, so the middle ends up looking kind of pale in comparison, which I'm not a fan of in regular painting. So the tendency to do it on this paper is kind of a downside. I got little hairs, that never helps out. But perhaps I can handle some very light glazes okay. And that's a plus. I can't be fussing with it, but very light touched glaze, and I can get that kind of see-through effect in some of these petals. Let's try it here. Not too bad. Alright, it handled the glazed layers fairly decently. Hard to say with the cold press ground because I was pretty impatient when I did this one. I didn't wait very long. I could try one more sample here. Could try to fit one more flower somewhere, like maybe on this edge here. Just have those two, let them dry out before I try to layer on top. Alright, so we were able to do some really fine lines on the watercolor ground with paint. Let's see, I've got some acrylic brushes. These were cheap, so I want to make sure they still work. Okay, they do, and they're metallic, so don't I have non-metallics? Don't I have a mix? Let me see. Or are they all metallic? Maybe they're all metallic. Maybe the whole thing is metallic. Okay. Smart me. I've got to have gotten... Yeah, there's some that are not metallic, so let's find... This one should be non-metallic. Okay, I think, yeah. The color's pretty bright for this one. We're gonna do... This is for testing. We're not gonna fuss. We're gonna do our best to keep this really fine. Light touch, just dragging it lightly over the surface. Pretty good, pretty good. I haven't used these markers in a long time, and I barely used them when I did use them, so glad to see they haven't all dried out. Glad to see they're still nice and juicy. Working well. They seem to work well on this surface, as expected. I think acrylic markers, you know, they're meant to work on as many surfaces as possible, meant to be pretty adaptable. Not fussy and delicate the way watercolor is. Watercolor really is kind of like the delicate princess of the art medium world. They need just the right paper and just the right brushes and just the right amount of water. Just the right delicate touch. I always want to feather and soften things up, like blend for a smooth gradient, but that's not how this medium, the acrylics, are meant to work, so I should probably not bother with that. Alright, that worked out pretty well, so looks like it can handle that well. Maybe I should try some metallic gold details somewhere here. Maybe around the sun. First I'm going to paint the sun with plain watercolor like I did with the watercolor ground. Alright, that's looking pretty good. Let's get a darker one. Hello, Hiragihia. How are you? How are you? Alright, that looks pretty good for that. We're going to try adding that, applying this now to the rough ground here. Alright. Since this line didn't turn out well, I'm just going to go over it again. This time with the acrylic. I'm not really fussing with the details here, or like worrying about mistakes, because these are all just testing materials to see how well this ground handles everything. We're not making a masterpiece here no matter what. You're good? What about you? I'm doing pretty good here. I'm testing out some of these, some free samples I got in the mail. Core, the watercolor company, they sent me a replacement for one of their paints, and with it they sent me a few freebie samplers, including these 3 ground water, like acrylic grounds, which is basically like you can, comes in a little bottle like this. This is one I've bought before already, and then you can kind of cover any absorbent surface, nothing too plasticky or smooth, but you can cover something up with a layer of this, and supposedly it should help you be able to do watercolor paint on top. The claim is it's nothing like real watercolor paper. It's very little like real watercolor paper, but I wanted to see how they each work and which one I like the best, because I do like the idea of being able to cover a surface and make it a brand new canvas for art. So I'm trying them with watercolor since they were advertised with the watercolor, and then I'm trying it with other things too, because this product, they actually, there's 2 versions. There's the ones that they've branded specifically like for watercolor ground and cold pressed ground and such, but the same product, they also have a different label, different branding under their other side company, their acrylic side of the company, where it's like fiber paste ground and like whatever ground, and they're basically like more like all-purpose grounds that with different textures and substances, with the general purpose of you being able to do some kind of art on top. So watercolor, maybe they're not specifically designed perfectly for watercolor specifically. So I'm trying watercolor first, of course, because that's what they advertised it for. But I'm also trying out other things like acrylic markers. I want to try some pen and ink with them, some color pencils, all that. So, going through the watercolor, we did some watercolor little flowers here, and now we've done some stems and things with the acrylic. Let's see, I did want to add some shadows to these leaves, or darker tones here. Something like that. Maybe I'll make the little flower an acrylic flower as well. I mean, no surprise that it handles acrylic paint well, acrylic markers well. Acrylic markers are also designed to do well with just about any surface anyway, so hopefully they would be good on a ground specifically to make things better for art. Here we go. Let's try about adding some little shadow. I should add the sun to this sucker. That's what I was doing, right? Yeah. So I'm gonna get some of our azo yellow here, and we're gonna create a little sun in the sky. Let's see if we can do this without lifting too much of the paint from the first layer off. Seems to be doing okay under there. Bring some of this magenta in to make some orange on the bottom. There we go. Keep using the yellow. I feel like here again with this watercolor ground, the paint really likes to creep up to the edges, snug up against the edge of this. For the sun it kind of works because the sun in real life kind of has a bit of that behavior, but I don't know about in general. We got a little splash here. That was a mistake, so of course lifting that off is no problem at all. Though it does lift off the paint underneath it as well. Maybe I should try lifting out some clouds so I could test the liftability of these grounds as well. Alrighty, and I did want to test here now how well this would layer up with the flower petals. And it does seem like if I actually properly wait for it to dry, the watercolor ground can also handle some light glazing layers as well. I was just too lazy to do that. Alright, looks good. Next up, I did want to test this one too. I shouldn't leave it too far behind. Alrighty, let's start with the flower petals again. Yeah, I feel like of the three, this one does feel the most, how to say, non-absorbent, the most reflective, rejecting. It really doesn't like the paint very much. Kind of wants to beat up on it a bit for some reason. Yeah. In terms of painting surface, I do think this is my least favorite. I was giving watercolor ground shit before, but actually compared to this, it is better than this. It does actually take paint okay in comparison. At least it holds a crisp edge, you know? Let's put a little flower bud here and there. Maybe it'll handle, I'm sure it'll like acrylic markers better at the very least. Let's see if it can handle layering Xerox layers at all. Some transparent flower layers. I wonder what this ground would be best used for. I feel like nothing. I don't know. I'm sure there's a good use for it somehow. It's general purpose, right? Okay, next up we're gonna attempt some stems. And for this again, I will be risking my nice Skoda brush, just so I can properly test whether it can handle thin lines, and it's not very rough, so it should be fine. Yeah, it seems to be able to do okay with it. Yeah. That's not terrible. I think it's still worse than the other two though. It just feels more fuzzy. Like it's rejecting the paint. But maybe some people would like that. Maybe it kind of feels like the nooks and crannies of rough or cold press paint paper for them, for some people. Maybe just not so much for me. We're gonna try mixing with another color as well. Let's get some variety in our leaf stem paints. It doesn't feel terrible to paint on. I do feel like the brush itself right now is doing a lot of the work on that though. This brush is pretty nice to paint with. I had my complaints about it in the past, but overall it does keep a good sharp little point here. Okay, let's see here. We have a few good stems there. Next we're gonna do some paint stems. Here we go. Switching over to Watercolor. I should really separate my metallics from my non-metallics here. This is getting a little... This is the same color. Oh. Is this also metallic? Yes, they're both metallic. Let's just use this one. Alright. Looking good. Nice little test there. We're going to use the red acrylic as well. And then some purple to define some of these. Oh, nope, that's fucking black. God damn it. Which purple did I use last time? This one? Whatever, no one can tell the difference. There we go. That's fine. That's fine. Now let's paint over these with some of this dark red. I wish I remembered which red this was. I was testing various paints some days ago. This well, I just don't remember what I was testing here. But clearly, now I've made it too opaque, so whatever see-through effect I could achieve, it's okay. It can handle some very light glazing, a little bit. But even though it can, just the little speckly, bubbly texture through the paint, it just is not, it's not working for me. Alright, that's enough of that. Let's give it a sun now. Same as before, we're going to do some nickel azo yellow here. Right in this top corner here. You know, it's handling the feathering out of this little circle okay, actually. So maybe small little gradient washes, smooth transitions like that, maybe it can handle that okay. Maybe. The edges of this, the gradient on this whole thing though, I don't know about that. Okay. Now I wanted to try the metallic gold on there. Why does, okay, good. I thought it didn't have the brush tip, but of course it does. Of course it does. I think I'll just outline the top of the sun. And a bit of the bottom edge of the sun. I still want to retain some of the edge to show the how the paint handles the edges. This is a pretty cool gold, by the way. Do I want to do some cheesy rays? Sun rays? Maybe I do. Maybe I do. mean, these markers are pretty juicy, so they're working well for me. I'm enjoying how juicy they are. I think different colors, of course, do have different levels of juiciness. But this particular one, this metallic color, is working very well. Okay. Let's see, how metallic does it look? The actual shininess is kind of middling. Let me try mixing it up here for the other ones. This one's a little more yellow. I think I'll try this for the cold press. I'll do the light dimensional ground later, the last, because I painted the sun on that last. Yeah, definitely the thing with the cold press ground, I think the texture looks the best. It handles the soft wash the best, like just in terms of the actual end result, I think it's the best. But caveat would be that in terms of gentleness, it's definitely between the three easily gonna damage your materials more than the other two. And the other two, I don't think they would damage them at all. This one is going to be pretty rough on things like your brushes, your marker tips. Don't use your precious stuff on it too heavily. Use your crappy stuff on it. Not your crappy stuff, but just know, maybe you need a light touch. Be a little careful. Because it's a rough texture, and also there's not really any give at all. Like I said, it's denser and it's just harder than the other two. Like, it feels tough. Like the light dimensional ground, it feels more squishy, plush. Like, it feels like there's a bit of a give there. Even though, like, in terms of literally, like, if you press on it, it's not like gonna bounce under your finger. But it's just the impression it gives me. Something I also like to experiment with is mixing the watercolor ground I already have, which hasn't really worked for me much. Like, I haven't really used it to success at all. Mixing it in with the cold press ground together to different consistencies and seeing how well I like those, so that I can make the cold press ground stretch farther and see if maybe I might even like some kind of in-between texture or consistency or whatever. There we go. Let's see, how shiny does that look? Yeah, it's not like for both of these, it's not like it's in your face shiny, but I'm thinking it's not the ground. I'm thinking it's the pens are just not that shiny. Like, I could test them on Let me grab a piece of regular paper. Where are my regular paper swatches? We'll try it on here. Yeah, it's just not going to be very shiny. If you want super shiny, you should just use the expensive metallic watercolor paints or something. Very dull matte sheen. Alright, let's do the last one here. And let's switch again to another metallic brush option. And this time let's use the fine tip instead of the brush tip. Well, actually, I do want to test with the same tip for at least some of it, just so I can have a basis of comparison that's consistent. Yeah, it just feels softer, like a pillow, like a marshmallow. Damn, even though I ate a lot, to the point that my stomach was hurting, I'm hungry again. Maybe I'll try eating a fruit after this. Maybe my mouth is just bored, as my sister likes to say. Am I really hungry, or is my mouth bored? My mouth might just be bored. And it's bored of chewing all this gum, too. I try to use gum when my mouth is too bored, but I've chewed lots and lots of gum today. Alrighty. I think overall, the main thing to note with the marker pens is that acrylic markers is that it feels like it's rougher. It's rougher on the tip for this one, so it might if you have expensive, nice markers, maybe not use it on the cold press ground. I mean, I feel like if your main medium for using on top of this stuff is gonna be like acrylic markers and things, for those, it's probably fine to do the light dimensional. It's probably good to do either of these two. If you want a bit more body, the light dimensional. If you want it to lay on thin, the watercolor ground. I just think this looks so much nicer though. Feels more premium, looks more premium. I really want to get a small jar of this. If you buy the larger jars, like, it's not available in the core line, but they sell the same they sell the same product under a different name, under Golden, called Fiber Paste, not for the watercolor ground, but for the cold press ground here, the rubber paper texture. It's called Fiber Paste under Golden, and they have 4 sizes. So if you go bigger, like 16 ounce or 32 ounce, you get a decent discount per volume. But I think I'm still gonna go for the smallest one, just cause I probably won't really use it that much. Like I've though they each failed. I've tried using this several times, applying several layers, and I've still got so much left. And if I mix this together with the other one, with the cold press ground, if I buy a small jar of that, then I could basically expand that cold press ground by almost double by watering it down with the stuff I don't like so much. Okay. Next I wanted to test pen and inks as well as pencils. And I think as well for those, the cold press ground is going to be pretty rough on the tips. So we're going to experiment, but we're going to try to be going with a very gentle touch here. So let's try here with this. Very light, very gentle. Yeah, definitely feel the roughness very acutely against this tip. Definitely don't want to make a habit of that. I think it'll work much better for the other two. Alright, I don't really want to risk it because I did just get these as a Christmas gift. Alright, yeah, definitely this handles it very well. I can even go finer. Let's see, we've got an 005 and an 01. We're going to go for the thinnest. See how it handles. Super thin. And yeah, handles it beautifully. So that's something the light dimensional ground is good for. Fine thin multi-liners, handles it well. I'm sure the watercolor ground is probably similar, but let's test it. The light dimensional ground is probably the gentlest on tools, just because it's so plushy. I think the watercolor ground is, out of the three, is the best for these fine details. It handles sharp, thin lines very well, because it's just so thin, you know? Thin and smooth. I think I'd like it better if it was completely smooth rather than having this brush texture on it. So maybe one day with my watercolor ground, I'll try applying it with a palette brush on some surface and see how I like it that. Alright, that went well. So, pens go great. How about my glass dip pen? Let's try that next. I already tried it with the cold press ground. It leaves a pretty fat line. But let's try now the light dimensional ground as well as the watercolor ground. I mean, glass dip pens, they kind of have a fat line no matter what, so it's not a surprise. But let's see how this goes. Alrighty. Let's try over here. Yeah, pretty fat. Just can't help itself. That's fine. Let's try it on the light dimensional ground as well. You know, I think the light dimensional ground handles it a little bit better, maybe. can get a little finer. Then again, I do have less ink on here, so that's not fair to, that may not be fair comparison. Let's load up the brush with a bit more ink again. So it's literally dripping. Dip off the excess. I haven't drawn a flower there yet, but let's just draw another line here. No, even when I've re-dipped the pen, it still seems to handle it a bit better. In terms of like the finest tip. I do still think I prefer the look of this one, maybe. I've already tried it on here before, but let me do it one more time just to compare on camera here. Dip off the excess. Yeah, and this does feel like if I press hard or use it a lot, like it could probably grind the tip of my nib pen a bit. Or my glass dip pen a bit. Like you can hear the scratchy sound. And you can see how it does bleed on the edges, so in terms of keeping a sharp edge, maybe the cold press ground might be the worst. So there's definitely, each of them definitely do have different pros and cons. It's not a, like one thing blows it out of the water. Blows the rest out of the water. Alright, let's try color pencils of some kind here. We're going to try gouache later too. Let's see here. Got a nice dark green here. Let's see. Where's my sharpener? Here we go. Our two-step sharpener here. First we do the bigger circle, and then we refine the tip over here. Gonna go back and forth a bit. Don't break. So the second hole, like you can see there's little numbers here, 1 and 2. The first one is to grind down the base and the wood, and then the second hole is to sharpen the very tip. And if I keep going, I can turn this into like a super sharp fine point, but I tend to stop before that because I'm lazy. So let's see here how this looks if I do just the dry pencil tip. And with this rough cold press surface, you can see there's quite a few gaps on this line from skipping over the rough edges of the paper or the ground. I'm also going to do some leaves here, and then I'm going to use water on them to see how that ends up looking. since they are watercolor pencils here. I might even do it on the line itself to see how that looks. I might also go ahead and do it on the flower itself a little bit to define the edges. Oh man, look at this Crimson Lake. It's my shortest color pencil, I think. I guess I've used it quite a bit. Or the lead broke a lot. That's probably more closer to what happened. What game is this music? Oh, Fire Emblem. Of course it's from Fire Emblem. Okay, that's okay for now. Close enough. It kind of just has a crayon edge look to it when I put the watercolor on this paper. Let's soften it up with some water. Oh, this brush is still a little dirty. Let's clean it again. Yeah, I think usually I'm not a fan of the look of watercolor pencils that are then activated on the page, because no matter what, most surfaces are still going to show a bit of that graininess from the surface area where the pencil originally ground up against, so it ends up leaving like a tough, grainy, scratchy texture. But I'm sure it would be useful in certain contexts. Like if you specifically wanted like maybe a rough bark texture or a stone, textured stone or something like that. I don't know. It does seem to work well when activating all along the edge. Like the fine line of the pencil line there too. So good with colored pencils, I think. Let's try with the other two. Not these, the color pencil. Here we go. Yeah, this, for the light dimensional ground, doesn't seem to accept the color pencil well either. It does seem to kind of reject it. Really spongy feeling. Yeah, just really not a fan. I feel like I'm poking a groove into the texture itself, you know, like I'm sinking an imprint with the pencil itself. But rather than having the pencil color rub off onto the texture properly, onto the texture of the paper properly, like you know, when you rub against it, some gets scraped off onto the paper. It kind of just rather sinks in while rejecting actually picking up and scraping off any of the color, because it is more smooth and soft and spongy, so it's not really gripping and scraping and rubbing. It's more absorbing the pressure. Not a fan. So light dimensional ground and watercolor pencils, not a good match. Even when I activate the color like this, like it's really not doing much anything. I think maybe the watercolor ground would do okay with it though. Well, let's see. definitely handles it much better than the light dimensional ground. So I would say for watercolor, if you want more of a closer to a hot press type texture, go for the watercolor ground and use something like a palette knife or something to apply it. Don't bother with you can't do it with only a brush because the brush will leave streaky brush texture, as can be seen in this example. But if you want that, you know, they call it a linen-like brush texture, you know. I mean, go wild. Doesn't appeal to me much, but I could see how someone could like it. And if you want a cold press or rough press, go for the cold press. And I would love to experiment with mixing the two and seeing how well that fares. Alright, that's looking good. And we're also going to do the little flowers here. Let's just add an extra flower somewhere as well. I didn't even bother with the light dimensional ground because I already knew it wasn't going to turn out pretty. With the color pencil that you do when you color things in, it does clearly reflect and show like the texture of whatever the ground has. So if you've got that brush line texture creating like horizontal or vertical lines all across the page, it's going to show through on the color pencil, which might be desirable for some people. I don't know. Where did my other brush go? Guess it doesn't matter. Right, so we're going to try wetting these. I think I'll leave a couple, like one leaf and like a bit of the stem untouched because I do want to still have it for posterity to kind of see the comparison. How does the color pencil look all by its lonesome, dry, versus with water? So up top here we can see how it looks with water. And that's as far as we're going to go there. Then we're going to do these little flower petals. I'll leave that last petal alone for the same reason. Maybe I'll try dipping the pencil in water also to see how that works. And of course that's going to create a thicker, chunkier, darker line. I think for the very tip I'm going to use a lighter yellow or yellow green color. Oh, don't break the tip. Oh man, I'm always banging tips of things against the edge of this desk. That's how I broke my first glass pen. First/last glass pen. My previous glass pen, which was also my first glass pen. Alrighty, we're gonna color one of those leaves and leave the other one alone. You know, when I started this, I was pretty hard on the watercolor ground. I didn't like it much at all. But I'm glad I'm doing this experiment because, you know, actually it's not as bad as I thought. It helps that it's applied to an appropriate surface as opposed to me trying to use it as like a whiteout to fix mistakes in watercolor painting, to paint over again. Wasn't very useful for that at all. Terrible for that. Or to try to cover a cover that's maybe not quite as absorbent. Like this is just having like a piece of cardboard. Yeah, it's gonna absorb pretty well into that to create a good surface. I tried to cover kind of a shinier. It was still like cardboard, but it was like a shiny cardboard. It's like a packaging. Shiny box packaging. And it did not like that. It peeled right off. I do like how, like for here where we've got the, I did this with the brush, the glass pen. It does retain kind of like a transparent feeling, and how the colors are kind of separating because it was a mix of a few different colors, and you can kind of see that in it. That's nice. All right. Next up, I think this is the last for the day. Maybe I'll also try to lift some clouds, but I want to do some gouache flower and stem. Maybe some metallic paint too. I don't know. I am getting pretty hungry, so we'll see. We'll see. I'm gonna pick up the white first. And let's see here. That's the paint. Where's my wash? What do you call it? Palette surface. My desk is such a hot mess. Oh, there it is. Oh yeah. Everything's about to tip over all on top of each other. All right. And we've got this sucker here. So we're gonna use this mixed with some of this red here. I'm gonna get some of the red here as well. Let's see how I like that first on this watercolor ground. As expected, it handles it pretty well. I think wash, like acrylic, because it's kind of thick, opaque, you know, it's pretty forgiving in terms of the surface compared to something like watercolor. I think it's gonna be fine or good on all three. I think it's gonna handle all three no problem. Still, the edges feel like they're a little fuzzy on the light dimensional ground. Alrighty. Too much water. Oops. Oh well. Yeah, I think for all of them, the things that they're most suited for would be things like opaque, flat color, sharp edges type stuff, acrylic, gouache, things like glazing in several layers, or soft gradients and like soft edges and things like that, soft transitions between colors. That's gonna be tougher for all of them, I think, but in particular, I think the light dimensional ground doesn't handle that kind of thing well. I think in terms of soft transitions, clearly between the three, we could see that the cold press ground handled it the best. I think I want to add some orange to the tips of some of these. Oh man, this tune is familiar. I played this on the NES emulation thing on Switch Online. It's a very short game. Very cute. It's like a pocket game. For the Game Boy. The first game. Pocket-sized game for a pocket-sized game system. Alright, now let's try adding the stems for these guys. Okay. This already has the stem down here, but we're missing some stems for some other flowers, so that's where we're gonna try to add one in here. It's pretty light there, so I might darken it up a bit. Let's see, where's my paints? There, let me add some of this phthalo green. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, the gouache can handle making some pretty thin, sharp, defined lines on light dimensional ground, and if it can handle that there, it's going to handle it pretty well in the other two as well, I'd say, especially the watercolor ground. You can see how on the edges it really likes to create kind of like a rough edge there. If I fill it in with some more watery gouache paint, then we can fill those little gaps easily though. Alright, that's looking good. Let's see about trying to make a little like transition of paint on light dimensional ground with gouache. And I think it should be able to handle it well, since it's kind of more working on the surface of the paint rather than absorbing into the paper to do any work. Like I said, gouache is very much less reliant on the paper for good quality results. Alright, looking good. Maybe I will also add some little yellow dots for like the little stamen pollen in the very middle here. Why not, right? Yeah, that's kind of cute. Totally unnecessary. It kind of stands out now because the rest of them don't have it, but that's okay. Just experimenting. Maybe I'll add some to the others as well later, or now. I'll try with a couple of them just to see how it looks. I think I might want to try darkening some of these flowers on some of these though, anyways. And then I do want to lighten up the very tips of these flower petals here. Just a bit. Yeah, that works. Feathers out well, just as I expected. Gouache is great for these surfaces. Probably acrylic gouache would be even better if I want it to be like a permanent surface for something like a sketchbook cover, which is what I'm thinking of, I want to use it for right now. But they basically, the acrylic gouache basically, it's gonna go on mostly the same, aside from the fact that once it's dry, it's not gonna move anymore. So I'm not gonna worry too much about testing that separately for now. Alright, I haven't put a stem down in the cold press for gouache yet. Let's do it here, maybe. Yeah, whenever I feel it, this surface compared to the light dimensional ground, there's no give at all. There's no squishiness. Some ways good, some ways bad. And for this, yeah, even though it can handle some pretty fine lines, just with the roughness of the texture, it is going to end up somehow a little bit fatter. I could probably get it finer, the line finer, if I really tried. I mean, you can see how thin the lines are for the multi-liner pen, so. And with gouache, since it's thicker compared to watercolor, it's that and acrylic markers and acrylics, they're just not gonna have the chance to, the risk of bleeding the same way water does, like with some of these stems that you see with the water, where it's just gonna bleed a little at the edges everywhere. Alrighty. Oh, that's a lot of paint. Maybe a tiny bit of black. Man, this black is completely dried out. I should add some water to it. Should I pour some from my own drinking cup? That would be a terrible idea. I'm sure that would add bacteria that will want to create mold. If I didn't have a separate squeezy bottle near me, I totally would have done it though. Because I live on the edge like that. And sometimes you want that rough texture, brush painterly effect too, so you're not going to be able to get that on the other two textures, so. And sometimes it can be a benefit. One thing that maybe perhaps could work well is to fill in shapes and things with watercolor and then create fine thin outlines with gouache or ink or acrylic, so that you can get those fine details easily with the tools that handle it better. but still get most of the body of colors and paints will be watercolor for watercolor look. I really like how this little flower turned out in the gouache. I'm really liking how gouache handles on all three of these. Well, I guess I technically haven't done the stem on this one though, so let me get that last stem in. Okay. Let's do it here. And then lighter. Yep, goes on very smoothly on the watercolor ground, of course. It's the smoothest surface. No pores or anything either. Okay. Now let's go ahead and add a, oh, whoa. There we go. Just a bit of yellow to the tips of these flowers to lighten up the edges while keeping them nice and warm. And then I do also want little yellow dots in the middle, like with the other gouache flowers. That works well. Now let's feather out the edges for these flowers, the little yellow edges. Wonderful. That turned out lovely. Alright. Let's see. Do I want any more? Oh yeah, I did want to try out lifting a bit. So let me get some couple scrubby brushes here. This one, and there should be another good scrubby brush. These two should be good for scrubbing. Then let me get my tissue, or a new tissue if I need. This tissue should work. Alright, let's try lifting some clouds here. I'm not great at clouds, so this is not gonna be a great, like, this is not like a cloud demonstration, okay guys? This is more just practicing lifting, trying out how the lifting works. And it cleans up very well, of course, on the watercolor ground, as I expected. It basically lifts clean off, and I'm expecting similar results for the other two, but we'll see if it might be a little more difficult or even more easy for the other two. I feel like the light dimensional ground, I feel it's no problem, it's gonna lift right off. I do want to try lifting like a sharp line. And of course it handles sharp line lifts very well as well. there's that. Let's try the light dimensional ground here. First with the scrubby round brush. Maybe it won't lift as well. Maybe it is a little more stubborn here. Interesting. When it feels like it's so repellent when you first apply any pigments or colors, it feels like it wouldn't absorb, but I guess over time, like at first it's kind of resistant, but then as it sits there, if you let them meld together a bit, it does absorb more. Very interesting. In some ways, sometimes I do prefer things not to be able to stain at all. Or like the opposite of what I just said. I sometimes I do prefer things that to stain in enough so that you can do stuff like glazing easier without it lifting immediately off. So maybe in some ways that is a good thing. If you're trying to lift a cloud off, maybe not. But this has the first layer had been left there for a day or two, so I don't know how well it could lift after a couple days, after if you do it immediately, like very soon. But you can see the comparison there. Much harder to lift. Oh, let me also try using the square brush for lifting on this thing. It's a little bit more stiff and structured, so yeah, pretty stubborn. I'm not getting any clean lines off of that. Now let's try the cold press. I feel like maybe the cold press is also not going to take it very well, especially since you really have to scrub hard. You're probably going to damage your brush. I mean, for a lifting or scrubbing brush, you really shouldn't be using a good one anyways. It should be pretty tough. Yeah, that's not lifting at all. I think that's lifting the worst out of all three. Like I said, pros and cons. And it's not really too much of a loss on this paper anyways, because if you are like using this surface, you probably don't want to try lifting too much anyway, unless you really have some brushes you don't care about at all. Yeah, really not lifting off. And then I want to try scrubbing off maybe like a little flower. So I'm going to try scrubbing this little guy. Let's see how well it goes. The multi-liner ink is supposed to be permanent, but I guess on this surface it's not. It hasn't fully absorbed, at least not yet. The flower, I do think it softened the edges a little bit, but the flower itself is still not coming off. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it's not. I kind of like it because one of my big complaints with the watercolor ground was how things just lift clean off, so I'm like, I can't glaze anything without it. Like, oh my god, you see, that was just like a water droplet, just a stray bullet there, and I wiped off the water droplet and it made a perfectly round hole where the water droplet was. Like, this, you sneeze on it and it's just wipes clean off. So clearly it's like it's good at a lot of things, but let's review, because I think I'm done with the painting and such for the day. Oh, that's not the right top. Let's put the tops back onto these things for now. That one, and then also this one here. Alright, so each one has its pros and cons. Starting with the watercolor ground, which I own. So this is the thinnest, the wateriest. You can probably make it stretch the farthest since you can create such thin layers. So if you want to just cover a surface enough to paint on it, this is a good option. It doesn't have any give or plush, so it feels nice and firm. You can give it different textures depending on how you apply it. So use a brush if you want like streaks, use a palette knife or something if you want it to be smooth. I think they also suggest somewhere that you can give it like more of a rough texture if you apply it with like a stippling sponge or brush or something like that. So you can apply different textures on it depending on how you apply it. But I think it probably, in terms of watercolor specifically, I think it best resembles closest to being able to copy more of a hot press surface, a hot press experience. It's the best one at handling really thin, crisp, fine edges and lines. It can handle some glazing, as we can see with some of these flowers here. It lifts really well, and that can be a good thing for you if you really want to be able to lift off mistakes, and it can be very forgiving. It's able to handle multi-liners very well. Look at these fine lines. And all the other mediums, acrylic, gouache, the colored pencils, they all work well. So overall, not a bad pick. However, I don't think it works well as a cover to fix mistakes in a watercolor painting. If you just want to cover up one little spot, even if it's just the tiniest little spot, it doesn't have really good coverage for some reason for me. Like if I try to cover like an accidental little inked line, errant line or something, or a sketch or anything in my watercolor painting to try to fix like a tiny little corner, like a little half a centimeter, you know, a quarter-inch space, it tends to muddy with whatever the pencil or ink or whatever from underneath, and it's going to look gray. You're going to have to put multiple layers and it's still not going to look right. So it's not good for fixing small mistakes in a painting. I've seen people try to use it to cover up coloring book pages. If they feel it's acceptable, power to them. I tried that as well, and I didn't enjoy it for that. It didn't feel like very fun. But I think it's best with pens, acrylics, gouache. Watercolor is okay as long as you don't do too many layers, like 2 layers, maybe 3 max. And it can have some nice effects like this here with the colors of the leaf, like the mixes and things. They can be nice, but for me, I'm not a big fan of the edging effect where the middle looks pale and then the edges look dark because the pigment all travels to the edges. The cold press is my favorite for sure, and I kind of had a feeling it would be kind of new from the moment I saw and compared the three. I didn't expect, like, I've seen these products online before, but I didn't expect it to be so nice in person. I like how it's more dense, tough, and hard, and that rough texture. It does look and feel, to me, the closest to something more like a luxury cold pressed cotton or a rough pressed cotton watercolor paper. And I am interested to see how different it is to compare smoothing it with a dry versus a wet palette to see if I can get it smoother than this or maybe rougher than this, depending on how they did this. I don't know. They didn't describe if this was done with a wet palette or with a dry palette. I really like how it, between the three, easily I think it handles the full page gradient the best. Very soft, smooth. You can see that, really beautiful and nice. So full page gradient, it's great. The lifting capability is the worst between the three, so it's quite things stain quite deeply in. I tried lifting some clouds here and this little flower here. The ink from the multi-liner lifted, but the flower itself barely moved at all, except maybe like some of the paint on the edges of the flower where the paint was most concentrated. But it also handles the gouache and the acrylic well. Not very good for multi-liner. One of the big downsides for this ground is that you cannot, you shouldn't use your nicest things on it because things like brushes, markers, pen tips, the surface is rough enough and hard enough that it will probably damage them if you use them a lot on this. A little bit here and there is fine, but don't 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 be using your nicest stuff on this for a whole piece and expect them to come out unscathed. It's gonna take its toll. So I think it's best for using more mid or cheap materials like water brushes, cheap brushes, things like that. But in terms of the end result, the finish, you know, I like it the best. One other downside would be that watercolor with the roughness of the texture of the three, it does have the most tendency to bleed at the edges because of they're bleeding from all the little crevices in the ground in the paper, and if you do find thin lines, it's going to have the most skipping across the surface, so it's going to be a fine broken line compared to like the watercolor ground, which is very smooth, and even the finest line, you can do like a thin unbroken line with relative ease. And then last, light dimensional ground. This would be my personal least favorite, but there are upsides and downsides. When I tried to do the full wash, I do feel that this ground seems to repel the paint, and it seems to repel a lot of the art materials. But the paint for the full wash in particular, you can fully see how it repelled against the edges here, and on the bottom too, even. And I had it tilted so that the water went down. And even in the middle here, on the seams, anywhere where there's some kind of break or anything, the paint repels, so not good for those soft, smooth, full gradients and full washes. Doesn't lift very well, still lifts at least a little bit, which makes it better than the watercolor ground, the cold press ground, which lifts almost this lifts like 1%, this lifts like 10%, and the watercolor ground lifts like 100%. It handles like the acrylic brushes, the gouache perfectly well as expected, and it handles the multi-liner pens decently good too. I think the pens work the best easily on the watercolor ground here. You can see how nice that is. This one's okay. This one's lots of skips and stuff, and I felt like I was damaging the tip of the pen. But despite that, in terms of the watercolor pencils, or just I think pencils in general, color pencils in general, this didn't handle well. The color didn't really rub off, more like the tip of the pencil sunk into the plush without the color being able to transfer onto the page very well, so it ended up very pale and not very satisfying. In comparison, I think the cold press ground handled the color pencils decently well, like around here. It is rough on there, rough on application, so I think the watercolor ground handled the color pencil best. So watercolor ground wins on colored pencils, it wins on multi-liner pens, and it wins on lifting. Cold press ground wins on staining, wins on the overall texture and full page washes and gradients. It wins on, it does well with the acrylics. It does fine on color pencils, not so good on the multi-liners. So yeah, each one handles each material a little differently. The acrylic pens and the gouache just goes well with all of them. And that's that. I think I will buy myself the small jar of the cold press ground, and I'm going to use it to cover my notebooks that I'm working on. And hopefully I'll find other uses for it too. I'm excited because I enjoyed this. I think I might add more later just for fun, or just doodle or something, but for now I want to grab a snack. I'm feeling tired, and I feel like this was a pretty good overview of the three surfaces. Really nice to be able to test them for myself before having to commit to jars for myself. I committed to this and it did not work out for me. At least for the things that I wanted it for. Now, I do think I've seen a better side of this now that I've tested with various materials, because I was trying to use it for specific things, specifically watercolor type things. And I don't think it's the best for that with how it lifts. I can't do much glazing or layering. I think the name is a misnomer. It's maybe not the best. I think the gouache, the color pencils, the pens, of course the acrylics. It would be great with those. It would be great. And I think I will try this with a palette knife on a surface soon to try to make a perfectly smooth hot press-esque surface. I'll try it. Maybe I'll do gouache because I need more excuses to use gouache because whenever I have a choice, I default to watercolor. And I love, love, love watercolor. It is my favorite. But I do have a lot of gouache, and gouache is also very fun and unique in its own way. So that'll be good for that. Alrighty, thank you. See you next time. Bye.